Hello, hello. Here we are. Excuse me. Thursday, reading another chapter. Yesterday, we talked about the giant's diet, which consists of snozzcumbers, which basically are huge, giant, rotten cucumbers that taste like frog skin, according to Sophie, and are absolutely horrific to eat, according to the giant. Excuse me. Yesterday, if you didn't notice, I did stumble across some of his words because the more the BFG talks, sometimes the harder it is to understand what he's saying. So I do apologize for all of those not so great words yesterday, but hopefully you understood it. Today we are in chapter 9, and it is called the blood bottler. See, look, I already started over myself. So here we go. The blood bottler. Okay, we're good, I promise. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the blood bottler!" But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and the 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth under his bottom, covering his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozzcumber was laying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in there just now?" he boomed. "I was jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Pilful-fizz," shouted the blood bottler. "Bug swapple," he boomed. "You was talking to a human being, that's what I is thinking." No, cried the BFG. Yes, boomed the blood bottler. "I is guessing you has snatched away a human being and brought it back to your cave as a pet. So now I is winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one in here," he stammered. "Why don't you just leave me alone?" The blood bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runtly little scumscrewer," he shouted. "Piffling little swig-figgler. Squimpy little bottle-wart. Prunty little pog-swiggler. I is now going to search the primroses." Jesus Pete's. He grabbed the BFG by the arm, and he was going to help me do it. "Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie appeared around the chewed-off end of the enormous snozzcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The blood bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish pink. There was black hair sprouting off of his chest and arms and off of his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squishy looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small, but the mouth was large. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying on the top of one on top of the other. Cranky yellow teeth strung out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler stood holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" And here is a picture of what the blood bottler looks like. To me, that is absolutely gruesome. "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings, and you is as dodly as a dog's wogger," cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozzcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the blood bottler picked it up. He examined the chewed off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to staying out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of those seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozzcumber large enough for her to crunch in so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, and what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The blood bottler and the BFG were going back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten snozzcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off the high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie? So is this the filthy, rotsome glubbage you is eating? Boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten snozzcumber. You must be cockles, and to be guzzling such rubbish squash. For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further from the track. This is the scrumdiddlyumptious snozzcumber, he said. I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you ever trying a snozzcumber, blood bottler? Human beings is juicier, the blood bottler said. You was talking rummy tot, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on. But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper. And do you remember who's in the blood? Not in the blood bottler. Do you remember who's in the snozzcumber right now? Mm-hmm. The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. You is not switch-fiddling me, is you? Said the blood bottler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite, and I am positive you'll be shouting out, oh, how scrumdiddly-umptious this wonder veg is. The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not wholesome always to be eating meaty things. Just this once, the blood bottler said, I is going to taste these rotsome eats for you, but I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your smudgy little head. He picked up the snozzcumber. He began raising it on his long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, don't! But that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up, up, and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge hunk of the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of an evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. Ugh! Roared the blood bottler. Swatch! Ugh! And he then spat. All of the great lumps of snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie himself, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had stuck the stony wall of the cave, she would have certainly been killed. Instead, she hit a soft fold of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the blood bottler. You little pig swiller. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of that snozzcumber over his head. Fragrance of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it? Yelled the blood bottler. That is the most disastrous taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beans. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is guzzly and glumptious, shouted the blood bottler. And tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the blood bottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I is plenty of cold eats in the squaddling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school children, the blood bottler said. I is very fond indeed of English school children's. They has a nice icky booky flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to giant peoples, shouted the blood bottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a piddling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you? Sophie. Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. And there I was telling him to eat the filthsome snozzcumber, and you was all the time inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you poor little children, cried the BFG. You was all covered in snozzcumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up the best he could. I is hating those giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it. And that is where we will stop today. Today got a little long. I apologize. It's all those words, and I struggle to get through them sometimes. So, all right, guys, I will see you here tomorrow for our last read of the week.